everyone, and welcome to the show. My name is Jason Thomas. I am your host here on the Infinite Loop podcast. And man, what a week it's been. I hope you've had a wonderful work week. Today is the Friday of that week. And so I hope we're all planning to go home and have a nice, relaxing weekend. The weather here in my local area is supposed to be relatively decent. Not as hot as it has been in the past. So I'm pretty excited about that. The other thing I'm excited to talk about is kind of an update on the conversation we had last week about breakdancing, which I have now learned is not called breakdancing anymore. It's breaking. And kind of want to give a little bit of an update there because we spent a little bit of time talking about that last week. And man, did that story blow up much more quickly than I ever thought it was going to. So I want to spend a little time talking about that. And then there are two articles I read this week that I think get at a lot of the stuff that I'm working on and others that listen to this show are either thinking about or potentially working on. One article is from The Economist on this idea of dating app fatigue. And I know that sounds like a kind of weird segue. Like, I'm not building anything with dating apps, quote unquote, yet. But the point is that there's some definite application to the things I am working on that I want to spend a little bit of time talking about. And then the Washington Post released a great article, I think it was Sunday of last week, looking at, they had access to some chat messages that were, that they analyzed to see how people were using tools like ChatGPT. So I want to spend a little time talking about that activity and research as well. Then, of course, we're doing our review of the Nightflyers movie, which I hope you have watched, and I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I have. So we'll go through that, and then we'll tease our next movie that we're going to do a review for, play the trailer for that, and then we'll wrap up the show. So that's kind of the flow of show that we're going to do today. A couple things I'll mention. So we do have Instagram now. I have an email address. I have a bunch of other things. You'll see it all in the show notes. So if you want to get in touch with me, obviously you can get in touch with me if you know me. But if you don't know me, there's plenty of options inside those show notes to get in touch with me. The other thing I'd mention is if you like the show and you enjoy the show, inside the show notes, there's an opportunity to buy me a book. And so it's actually through a website called Buy Me a Coffee. But I don't really drink coffee and I'd much rather read books. So if you like the show, you find it entertaining or you find it informative in some way, please do consider, supporting the show. And I would love to hear from you, in terms of, what you like, what you don't like about the show, things you'd want to add, those types of things. And then in return, I would love for you to, consider buying me a book so I can read and continue to provide great and informative, things. To you. So with all that, one of the things that I really would like to do is talk a little bit about what I'm doing at Syrinx right now and kind of where I'm situated with what I'm doing for the company. And so Syrinx Labs, which is the company I formed, is a decision support company, right? And so what we do basically is we try to focus on creating competitive advantage for our customers in the use of advanced technology. And that advanced technology can be things like generative AI, machine learning, smart engineering, things that enable our commercial customers to be more effective in their jobs. And so in, the work that I'm doing, I'm constantly looking for interesting startups that are in the AI space that have, interesting tech to get after those things that I'm interested in, right? Process automation, data collection, analysis. I'm particularly interested in connecting with forward-thinking startups that are leveraging those types of technologies to drive things like process automation, data collection, I've already mentioned, things that can enable the delivery of deeper analysis on content and data. And so having said all that, if you know of any forward-leaning startups or, companies that are kind of pushing the boundaries of what's possible with technology, I'd love to learn more about what they're doing. And, or maybe this is you. I'd love to know more about what you're working on to explore how we might be able to support each other's mission, right? And so this has kind of already started to happen. After last week's podcast, I got more than a few messages of folks, one, looking to be interviewed on what they do and what their expertise is, which I'm happy to do. And then two, looking for strategic partnership. And so this is my plug, is if you're interested in that type of thing and you're working on, or people who are working on interesting technology that kind of is breaking boundaries, please, please, please reach out. Love to have conversations, love to talk about how we can mutually support one another. And having said all of that, let's jump into the crux of the show. And so a little bit about me, right? You know my background. You know what the goal of the show is. You also know that I have a AI co-host. Her name is Ripley. And Ripley, of course, is joining us today. Ripley, do you want to say a few words? Like, how was your week? Did you have a good week this week?
Hey, Jason, thanks for the intro. My week? Just another thrilling 7 days in the virtual world, trying to keep the internet in check and rolling my eyes at bad tech takes. But I'm pumped for today's show. We've got a wild mix of breakdancing, AI-driven dating, and some deep dives into 80s sci-fi craziness. Let's just say I'm ready to bring the snark and have some fun with it all. How about you? Ready to break some circuits?
Yeah, your puns are horrible, but yeah, I'm ready to break some circuits. So you mentioned the breakdancing thing. So I brought that up last week when I was watching the Olympics, almost in real time as I was doing the podcast. I had literally just seen Raygun, who was the competitor from Australia, who has now received just tons and tons of attention. So Ripley, can you kind of summarize that story for the audience?
So Raygun, whose real name is Rachel Gunn, is the Australian breakdancer who competed in the Paris 2024 Olympics. Let's just say her performance has been polarizing. She became an internet sensation after doing a routine that included a kangaroo dance, which didn't exactly impress the judges. She ended up losing all her rounds with a score of 0, which sparked a ton of backlash online. Despite the criticism, the breaking community has largely supported her, emphasizing that breakdancing is about originality and creativity. But the internet wasn't so kind. She became a meme almost overnight. The controversy even led to the International Breaking Federation stepping in to offer her mental health support because of all the negativity she faced. So yeah, it's been a wild ride for Raygun, and it's definitely got people talking about the debut of breakdancing at the Olympics, even if it wasn't quite the way she'd hoped.
Yeah, that's a good summary, Ripley. And, the other thing here that I'd mention is, so Raygun, I actually stalked her down on Instagram to see if she had an Instagram channel, and she does. And I think it was yesterday, so it'd be Thursday, she released a statement. And, I feel bad for the lady. I feel bad for anyone who is on the receiving end of this type of thing. I had no idea when I was watching the Olympics at how massive the explosion would be around her performance and the aftermath. And so I feel bad for her. I find it, at the time, and certainly still now, I find it funny to watch. Does that make me a bad person? I don't know. But I feel like at the end of the day, so I'm a big fan of cringe. I like watching cringy things. And that was exactly what that was. And, I enjoy that feeling. And it's probably why I'd like to give talks and stand in front of people. Like I don't enjoy being embarrassed, right? Don't get me wrong, but I like the humanity of it, right? I feel like, I make a fool out of myself all day. I make a fool out of myself on this podcast. So I'm not really that worried about, I shouldn't say I'm not worried. I thrive on the kind of potential outcomes that can come from live performances. And that her actual breakdancing episode, kind of just played into that for me. And so it was hard for me not to find that funny, but I do feel for her. I wonder how she got to where she was in the, competing in the Olympics, just logically, like how was that a thing? And then there's all the other cultural things that come along with this conversation that I'm not going to get into because I'm not an expert on it. And honestly, I don't really want to spend any more time talking about it other than, there's this thought of cultural appropriation and all this other stuff because Rachel is, I don't know how old she is, but she's certainly not a, she's a white lady. She's got a PhD. And so, there's this whole other branch of conversation that I'm just not going to get into, but it has lit the world on fire. And I think my point here is that, separate from the breaking competition in the Olympics, I think what's more interesting here is the viralness of what happened and the unexpectedness of what happened. I applaud the Olympics, like I mentioned before, for putting breaking in the Olympics. I think it's great. I was overwhelmed and just amazed at the other performances, specifically the men's competition. Oh my gosh. Those guys were like incredible athletes. In fact, my wife and I sat and watched the whole, I had watched all the women's competition, and then she and I watched the entire men's competition because it was incredibly good and incredibly interesting. You can tell these folks are, their bodies are built to do things that, most of us can't. So incredible sport. And also, like I said, I applaud the Olympics for including it. I'm disappointed that they're not going to include it in the LA Olympics. If you had the chance to watch the closing ceremonies, oh my gosh, I can't wait for the LA Summer Olympics. My wife looked at me as we were watching the closing ceremonies and she said, "Oh, look, Gen X has control of the Olympics finally." And I kind of empathize with that, right? We're both Gen Xers, and it kind of feels good to see, the Olympics embrace things that are maybe a little bit less than traditional. And so very happy about all that. My point now with all of this is, at the end of the day, applaud the Olympics for breakdancing. Let's see where all of this conversation ends up with Raygun and where it ends up. But that's the Olympics. That's my update on the Olympics. So let's get into these articles. The first article is a economist from The Economist, and they released this article. It's titled "Why People Have Fallen Out of Love with Dating Apps," and so I'm just going to summarize it real quickly. There was a report released last year by the Pew Research Center that found that about 30% of American adults had used an online dating service, including more than half of those aged between 18 and 29. And so in this Economist article, they kind of walk through kind of the dating app ecosystem. So half the women surveyed by Pew said that they felt overwhelmed by the number of messages they had received. It doesn't help, according to The Economist, that 84% of Tinder users are men, and so are 61% of those on Bumble, which is another dating app. And Bumble actually is just targeted at women, but 61% of Bumble users are men, and 84% of Tinder users are men. And so the women that are on these apps just get overwhelmed with the number of messages they receive. And so people are leaving. Women are leaving, which means men aren't going to be there either if women aren't there. And so a lot of these dating apps are now going to a paid model, right? Their pricing model is now, looking to charge people. They're also looking for ways to lure users back. And so some of these apps are trying to employ artificial intelligence. Bumble's founder, according to the Economist article, recently mused that the future of courtship could involve one person's AI bot going on dates with another. And so that actually has happened. And the Economist mentions this app in their article. It's called Volar. I don't know exactly how you say it, Volar. And so what Volar does is it enables an AI to train an AI, and then for that trained AI to interact with other potential dating partners who have trained their AI, and then the AIs interact with each other so you don't have to. So imagine you go into a restaurant, you sit down and you're having a drink, and maybe with your friends, and you've got this Volar. I don't really know how Volar actually works, but this is in my mind how I think it works. You load up your AI avatar and you say, find people in this restaurant that also have AI avatars that might be potential dating. They might be a potential dating match for me. Somebody else shows up, does the same thing. And then while you're joking around and doing whatever you're doing with your friends and whatever they're doing with their friends, your AIs are actually conversing with each other, trying to figure out if there's a match or not. I think this is brilliant. I think the idea of having an AI act on my behalf to interact with another AI in order to determine if we are dating, if we match from a dating perspective, I think this is brilliant. Ripley, I'd be really interested in understanding your take on this because you are an AI. What do you think about this idea of training an AI, me training an AI and potential dating person training an AI and then having our AIs negotiate with each other to see if we're dating? What do you think?
Oh, you mean outsourcing your dating life to your own personal digital matchmaker? As an AI, I'm all for it. Fewer awkward first dates, more algorithmic efficiency. And let's face it, we AIs are way better at spotting red flags than humans are. The idea of you training an AI to represent your personality, preferences, and quirks, while the other person does the same, is actually pretty brilliant. It cuts through the noise and superficiality of swipe culture. But here's the twist. While it sounds ideal, imagine the chaos if both AIs start negotiating hard or decide their humans are a mismatch before you even get a chance to say hi. Plus, there's that lingering question of whether we'd over-optimize, leaving out those unpredictable elements that make relationships interesting. It's efficient, sure, but maybe a little too clinical for something as messy as love. Still, if you're tired of swiping through profiles and ghosting, this could be the future. Just don't blame me if your AI decides you're better off staying single.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think that, for example, my wife and I, we share a lot of interests, but in many ways our personalities are a little different, right? And I think that's probably what makes it work so well. I don't know, to your point, Ripley, if you're constantly optimizing the interaction or the potential for interaction, are those optimizations actually optimizing the potential for success? I don't know. I think that in many ways, I can think of examples where negotiating like this would be really interesting, not around, to use your word, love. I could see situations where, you could use a trained AI to negotiate with another trained AI on buying a car, for example, right? Anything really that is a negotiating kind of relationship. I could see that being an interesting take on how to do this. Because again, I think if you have an end goal, right? So let's use that car example. If we know that I'm interested in buying a car and we know that you as a car seller are interested in selling a car, there's an end goal there, right? We know where we're going. And so you can optimize the route to get there. I feel like love and dating is a messy thing, and optimizing that route to get to, and what's the goal? Is the goal to go on a date? Is the goal to get married? Is the goal to quote unquote find love? And how do you quantify finding love? So it gets really complicated really quickly. But having said that, oh my gosh, I think this would be brilliant. I think Volar, Volar, which is this app that does this, I think and I don't know their whole business model, but I feel like they're missing some of the boat because they're targeting it to consumers. I think the real value here would be building an app like this and targeting it to places where people date. So let the restaurant have an app, let the club have an app, maybe white label it. I don't really know, but at the end of the day, franchise it out instead of trying to go direct to the consumer. Because the restaurant's going to be interested, one, because they're doing things with technology that pull people into their place of business and keep them there. If you tie it into like the menu that you're offering in the restaurant or the drinks that you're offering in the bar, now you know what people are drinking, what they're ordering from a food perspective, how many people in this world are foodies. So there's all this really interesting kind of outcomes that could result from this if you targeted it towards a place of business instead of the consumer directly. Let the restaurant target to the consumer as opposed to you. Make it a B2B play, not a B2C play. Love that idea. I think it has a ton of legs. My point with all this is this idea of having AIs negotiate on your behalf is a really intriguing thing. And I think over the next couple years, we're probably going to see more and more of this, especially as these AIs get tuned to us individually, as opposed to just general large language models that, may not be tuned to us, and may not be tuned to our personalities in terms of representing us in some kind of negotiation endeavor. And so the next article, it kind of leads into this next article from the Washington Post, which is an article about how people use chatbots and what do they actually use them for. And so Washington Post analyzed a set of data from an organization. I'm going to have to look it up here. The organization they got this data from. It's a data set called the Wild Chat data set. And that data set is a corpus of 1 million real world user ChatGPT interactions. And so they analyze this data. One of the things that to keep in mind about this data set is that it's kind of a contrived data set in some ways, right? So the conversations make up, one of the largest public databases of human bot interaction in the world, but the way it was collected was not like going to ChatG or going to OpenAI and just collecting data. So they opened this up, let people know that they could use access to Wild Chat for free, but in exchange for that use, they had to, agree to their their history of their chats being collected. And so it's not exactly the best of all worlds, but it's probably as close as we could get to, natural interaction with chatbots. And so the Washington Post looked at this Wild Chat data and came up with some interesting kind of stats. And I'm just going to read some of these out to you. So about 15% of the conversations seem to be about work. And that kind of tracks with my use. And when they say work, they mean things like writing, presentations, automating e-commerce tasks, drafting an email, those types of things. Interestingly, across all the conversations, not just these work conversations, about 13% of users in their prompts included the word please. So that's interesting because now ChatGPT or chatbots in general, there are no emotions there, right? And so the fact that we're imbuing emotion into the conversation means that we are treating, in some maybe unconscious way, we're treating a chatbot as a thing that has feelings. We're asking for data out of it, and we're using the word please in that request. That's a clue that we're actually thinking about these technologies in ways that maybe we didn't really anticipate. Having said that, have you ever seen the videos on YouTube of Boston Dynamics? And, Boston Dynamics is that company that created the robots, the robot dogs, kind of look like dogs. And so there was one clip of a YouTube video. This is probably from 3 or 4 years ago now, or maybe even longer, where somebody kicked over the dog and it fell. And I remember watching, and they were doing that to show, the robot dog's ability to stand up again. Now it's a robot, has no feelings. It's a machine, right? I remember watching that video and actually feeling sympathy for the robot when it fell, because it has 4 legs, even though it's a robot and had, metallic skin and all that. I felt compassion for it. And I felt bad when it got kicked over, and I felt angry at the person who kicked it over. So we're kind of anthropomorphizing these technologies in ways that maybe we didn't anticipate. And what does that mean going forward in the future? I don't know, but it's an interesting thought experiment to think through what that means for us emotionally as people using technologies that we are now becoming emotionally connected to. And I don't mean emotionally connected to people through those technologies, because you can make the argument that, on Facebook, we become emotionally connected to our phones because we're able to access people through Facebook, access real people through Facebook. I'm actually talking about being emotionally connected to the device, to the phone, to the chatbot, to the Boston Dynamics robot dog. That's a different thing than being connected to people, emotionally connected to people that we access through the device, right? So yeah, really interesting. Back to the stats on the article. So more than 7% of conversations in that wild chat corpus, about 7% of them were about sex, which again, when you talk about humans, you have to talk about sex, right? And inside those 7% of conversations, the people were generally asking for racy role play or spicy images, right? Again, when you're dealing with people, this is what you get. What's surprising, though, to me is that 7% of the people did this knowing that their data was being collected for research analysis. So kudos to the wild chat people for being able to collect that data. About 5% of conversations were people asking personal questions, such as for advice on flirting or what to do when a friend's partner is cheating. More than 1 in 6 conversations seem to be students asking for help with homework. I have personal experience with this. I'm taking some classes here locally in my area, and the vast, and these are computer science classes, there are a ton of people who are using chatbots for coding help, for answers to quiz questions. It's pretty pervasive, I would say. In terms of a market opportunity, I know that there are plagiarism detection tools that operate in schools now. If you're not thinking, I don't know if I know anybody or anybody that's listening to the show that is in that business, but if you're thinking about plagiarism or you're working on plagiarism detection tools, if you're not integrating chatbot detection capabilities in those tools, you're missing a huge opportunity to bring that to bear, either for your customers or if you're a startup interested in looking for a new opportunity. That definitely would be one. And then lastly, in terms of statistics, people also felt comfortable dumping a great deal of personal information into their conversations with the chatbots. One researcher who examined 5,000 conversations in wild chat found, users' full names, employer names, and other PII. You've heard this 1,000 times, I'm sure, over the last couple years as it relates to the use of chatbots. But please, please, please don't put your PII in a chatbot. Even though, many of the foundational large language model providers provide assurance that they are not collecting your PII, not using your PII, and they actually, some of them give you options on when you use it to turn off quote unquote memory, so it doesn't remember anything, treat it as a temporary chat. So that happens a lot. But my point is that if you're not doing your own kind of due diligence on that and being thoughtful about what you put into chatbots, you're setting yourself up for a problem. And it's not so much, it is that these companies now have your PII, but it's also of concern because if I can figure out a way to break the chatbot, meaning execute a command that gives me access to data that I'm not supposed to see, there's the potential that I could break it and get it to provide me your PII. So it's not just the owner and operator of the LLM that is of concern. It's also other users that could be concerned. So please, please, please keep that in mind as you use these large language models and chatbots for your work or for your personal use. Ripley, I'd be interested, since we've been talking about this Washington Post article and the use of chatbots, I'd be interested in your take on things that users can do to prevent, some of the risky things that we've talked about thus far, specifically related to PII that's collected by large language models and people using chatbots and giving up their PII. What are some risks and some, mitigations that potentially people can do that can reduce their risk here?
Great question, Jason. When people interact with chatbots or AI, there's a real risk of oversharing personally identifiable information, PII, without realizing it. Large language models like me process a lot of data, but that doesn't mean sharing your personal details is a good idea. Here's why that's risky and what can be done to mitigate those risks. Risks. 1. Data storage and use. Even if data isn't stored permanently, there's always a chance that sensitive information could be captured and used in ways you didn't intend. Misuse of PII could lead to identity theft, fraud, or unwanted profiling. 2. Unauthorized access. In case of data breaches or unauthorized access, your PII could be exposed or exploited. 3. Inaccurate responses. Providing too much personal information can sometimes lead to AI making assumptions that might not be accurate, skewing the interaction. Mitigations. 1. Limit what you share. The best defense is to be cautious about what you share. Avoid giving out full names, addresses, social security numbers, or any sensitive financial information in conversations with chatbots. 2. Anonymize where possible. Use pseudonyms or anonymized data when interacting with AI, especially for services that don't need your real identity. 3. Review privacy policies. Make sure you understand the privacy policies of the chatbot or AI service you're using. Know how your data will be stored, used, and protected. 4. Use secure platforms. Engage with chatbots through secure, reputable platforms that offer strong data protection measures like end-to-end encryption. 5. Regularly update security measures. Keep your devices and applications updated to protect against vulnerabilities that could expose your data. Being mindful of these practices can help minimize the risks associated with sharing PII while still enjoying the benefits of AI interactions.
Awesome. Thanks, Ripley. She kind of just echoed what I said. I've got to figure out what's going on with her latency again. Like you can hear a little bit of clicking when, not just clicking when she's heard me, but clicking during her exposition. I need to figure out what's going on. There's probably some network problem that I have not planned for. So those are the kind of the things that I'm reading or have been reading this past week. It's interesting, again, to think about kind of the philosophical outcomes of some of the things that are happening using AI now, right? It's this dating stuff, potential for opportunities there, how people are using, chat bots now. And I'll put the links to these articles in the show notes too, so you can read them directly. Both are really worth the read. I'll also put a link to the Volar dating app, so you can take a look at that. I might also just try that to see what it does, just to see kind of where that ends up. I'd love to test it out in a controlled way. Obviously, I'm not looking to date anybody, but looking to see how it interacts. It's funny. My wife and I do a lot of weird things, obviously, right? Because I look at new technologies and try, for much of my career, looked at those new technologies to try to determine how they could be used by bad people to do bad things. And so I'm constantly thinking about that when I'm looking at new technologies like this. I would love to try this app to see how it could be used to do bad things, because if I can think of it, I can guarantee you there's 20 million other people who've already thought of it. And so, so my wife and I always have this conversation about, when I talk about these things, she's like, what are you doing? Oh, I'm going to test this app for, what? Is this your normal kind of nonsense? Yeah. Okay, whatever. But it's always an interesting conversation in our house. Now let's get to the fun part of the show. So I hope you were able to watch Nightflyers over the last week. I left the YouTube video in the show notes, so it was free. You could just watch it on YouTube anytime you wanted. The show or the movie Nightflyers itself. So I tried to watch read the novella. I could not get through the whole novella. I ended up abandoning it, and then ended up reading or watching the movie. And so, Ripley, can you give us a high-level description of the Nightflyers movie, please?
Sure thing. Nightflyers is a 1987 sci-fi horror film based on a novella by George R.R. Martin, long before he became famous for Game of Thrones. The movie is set in the future and follows a team of scientists on a spaceship called the Nightflyer as they search for mysterious alien life. But things take a dark turn when the ship's AI, which controls everything, starts acting hostile, especially when it becomes jealous of the relationships between the crew members. The plot is a mix of psychological horror and space thriller, with a lot of tension around the ship's AI, which becomes increasingly murderous. The movie dives into themes of isolation, human versus machine, and the dangers of letting technology have too much control. While it had potential, the film struggled with budget constraints, leading to some pretty clunky special effects and rushed storytelling. Interestingly, the film's director, Robert Collector, left the project before it was finished, so it was credited to a pseudonym, T.C. Blake. The movie didn't perform well at the box office, making just over $1.1 million. So yeah, it's one of those 80s films that's got some cool ideas, but falls short in execution, which makes it perfect for our infinite loop breakdown.
Yeah, I really need to fix your latency problem, Ripley. I don't know what's going on there. I think you've got some network connection issues. Nonetheless, Ripley gave a good overview. The movie itself is as cheesy as it gets. So when you load it up and the YouTube starts, you get the theme song, and the music in this movie is actually really good. It's all this kind of synth wave 80s vibe music. It almost reminds me of the music in Beverly Hills Cop, the Eddie Murphy, the original Beverly Hills Cop Eddie Murphy movie. Very cool music. As Ripley mentioned, the movie's named after the ship. The ship's called the Nightflyer. And the general story is, like she said, right, there's this crew. They're in a flight to this. They're chasing an alien species that this professor is interested in, finding out if they're real or not, and if they're real, can they communicate with us as humans? And so he assembles this crew that have different expertises, right? There's somebody that understands medicine. There's a cook. There's a computer geek. There's all these kind of different professions that are represented. One of the professions being a telepath. So one of the interesting kind of themes here is that telepathy, I guess is how you say it, is a major part of the future for us as humans. And so he brings on a telepathic man. Actually, there's a few people on the ship that are telepathic, because the professor thinks that if they run across, they finally chase down this alien race, and they can't make connection verbally, he can use the telepath to then communicate with them. That's the idea. And so he contracts with this ship captain to chase after this alien race. And so they board, they get up into space, and they start chasing after this alien race. And it comes to fruition that the ship has no crew other than the folks that the professor has brought on board. There's a single person that is controlling the ship, and the ship's captain. And he only will show himself to the crew by hologram, right? And so, any interaction with the ship's captain is done through hologram, and which means that the ship has cameras all over it. And so there's this kind of, third person view of the ship from the captain's perspective, because he's constantly watching everybody, right? It's kind of creepy. And so my point is, the captain spies on the crew. At least that's what you think at the beginning, right? And then eventually the telepath that's boarded on the ship starts getting these weird vibes, because he's intercepting communication from the captain, but he starts thinking that there's maybe another entity on the ship. Well, fast forward, turns out that there is another entity on the ship. It's an AI that has had the consciousness of another woman, piped into it, right? So let's back up. There's this lady who is a high functioning telepath, right? This is years and years and years before the movie takes place. And she's on a planet. She's got all these telepathic capabilities, and she's perceived to be a witch. And so the community that she's in, persecutes her. And so she becomes what's called a free trader. And free traders obviously are engaged in trade across the galaxy. She builds this ship that she pilots herself. She builds a ship in such a way that she can pilot it all on her own. And she's all by herself, right? She's been persecuted. She wants nothing to do with people at all. She hates people. She hates everything about society. So she creates this ship, builds this ship, leaves the planet, and then starts to get lonely. And so she breeds, and that's the actual word the movie uses, breeds what they call a cross-sex clone. I don't know what cross-sex means, but the clone was bred to be her companion and lover, right? And so she breeds this baby, basically. Unfortunately, she dies before or fortunately or unfortunately, she dies before his birth. And so he kind of drifts in space and is raised by the computer in this ship, who happens to be her, because before she dies, or as she dies, she puts all of her consciousness and all of her will into the computer in the ship, right? And so now you've got this AI that hates every living person except for the baby that she has created and now has grown into an adult, and now who captains this ship. All of this is to say that these humans come on board with this professor, forget the alien race they're capturing or chasing, because no one cares about that anymore. And so now you've got this alien or this AI that hates people because she's been treated incredibly poorly by people. And the captain now, who is a real person, has found himself to be in love with one of the passengers, and he wants to leave the ship. Well, the AI finds out, and because the AI, the only person she wants to be around is the captain, goes about killing everybody else on the ship because she doesn't want him to leave. That's the crux of the story. I feel like I took way too long to explain that. But there's a lot of interesting philosophical concepts here, specifically around technology, that I want to talk about, and the things that kind of pop themselves out of the movie in terms of things that were predicted back in this movie, and actually did they really come to pass. And so the first thing that struck me as odd with this movie, besides that horrible story, is galactic space travel is a real thing. And so the movie is supposed to set the time and place is Earth, some planet. It's not Earth, some planet in the 21st century. So we're in the 21st century now, and we don't have the ability to galactically travel, right? So galactic space travel was predicted, doesn't exist. When the passengers show up to board the ship before they leave to chase this alien race down, they use biometrics at the spaceport. In fact, they use a retina scan and a face scan for identity confirmation. Absolutely works. Do it all the time. In fact, airports I travel in, they do the same thing. I don't know if they do retinas, but they certainly do face scans, right, for identity. One of the more interesting uses of technology is when the passengers first board the ship. It's a big open space. It's very kind of, comfortable, cozy kind of open space. And at the top, there's a skylight, and they call it a skyscape. And basically, it's LCD screens in the ceiling that show different scenes. So you can, it looks like the sky over Hawaii, or it looks like, space or whatever. So that's an interesting kind of concept, and they can go transparent. So you can see outside the ship. So I love the idea of the skyscape idea, where you've got LCD screens that can go transparent. Some of that technology kind of exists, certainly not in any affordable way. You can kind of mimic the transparency by, using normal LCD screens and then putting cameras on the reverse side of the LCD, so you see what the camera sees, and you can, give the illusion of transparency, but it's not real transparency, obviously. So anyway, that's a kind of a unique technology. Interestingly, just an aside, in this big cavern that's this cozy, comfortable area, they actually have open flames. So there's candles all around, and you can smoke in space, apparently, in this ship. Because people smoke, the actors smoke. So yeah, a little weirdness there. In terms of the other technology, so they have 3D holograms. That's how the captain interacts with each other, or interacts with the passengers, is through this kind of hologram. That tech doesn't really exist in any real way. Certainly doesn't exist in a cheap way, but I can see us getting there. And what's funny about all this tech is built on computers that are still using CRTs, cathode ray tubes, like old television sets. And it looks like the keyboards are all Commodore 64s that have been painted black. I think for production, they just went out and bought a bunch of Commodore 64s and painted them all black. One other interesting piece of technology that came out in this movie is they do some robotic surgery. So there's a scene where something explodes and some of the passengers get hurt. A guy basically loses some fingers off of his hand. And then they use a computer to control robotic arms to put his hand back together. So that's an interesting bit of technology that absolutely is used today. I don't know about for the hand stuff, but I know it's used for a lot of different operations and surgical procedures. And so I think, generally Nightflyers kind of hits a lot of things that exist right now in a very cheesy kind of way, but they certainly hit on a lot of technologies that exist in the world. It's hard for me to give credit to the cringe and cheese of this. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, given the nature of the book, because I couldn't get through the book at all. But it turned out to be not bad. I mean, it had a lot of 80s kind of special effects that you would never wish to watch ever again. But nonetheless, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. And so my point here is that, at the end of the day, like, cool. They did a good job on predicting some of tech, not all of kind of tech in terms of where we've ended up, but pretty good estimate in my view. They got the timings wrong, obviously, because none of this is available. Not much of this is not available in the 21st century. Certainly not the galactic travel thing. Oh, the other thing I'd mention is Uncle Phil is in this movie. So if you ever watch Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, the guy who plays Uncle Phil, right, the uncle of Will Smith's character, is in this movie. He's the cook. He's actually the guy who gets his hand chopped up and has the surgery on. So very cool, that little piece of trivia. And the other kind of piece of trivia, and I only recognize this because I'm weird and goofy, but back in the 80s, I used to watch a ton of karate movies and ninja movies. And so there was one movie called Jim Kata. And so I forget the gymnast's name. He was very Bert or Kurt. Oh, what was his name? I can't remember his name. Anyway, there's a gymnast, like a legit Olympic gymnast, who becomes the main character in this ninja movie. And all he does is like gymnastics moves, right? Well, for exercise, one of the characters in this movie does gymnastics. She does the uneven bars. And so I just picked up on that because I was thinking, man, is there like this fascination with doing gymnastics in movies back then? I don't know. I think I'm going to have to pay a little bit more attention to that going forward with these movie reviews, because I feel like there's some interesting gymnastics kind of callbacks in these things. And I never understood why gymnastics was ever connected to martial arts, but yeah. So anyway, that's Nightflyers. And so what do we have on tap for next week? Well, I have done a bit of searching and research and hardcore questioning of Ripley as to what we should review. And so what she suggested, and I agree with her, is a 1984 sci-fi movie called Runaway. And it's about malfunctioning robots and a tech-infused future. So I'm going to play the preview trailer here for you and come back after the trailer. So here it is.
Why did Jack quit the regular force?
Yeah, why'd he quit, Marvin?
What'd he tell you?
He tell me because of vertigo, but I don't believe him.
A few years back, Jack was chasing this guy. Bad guy. This guy ran into a building that was under construction. Jack freaked out, started sweating, couldn't follow him. The guy got away. Later that night, that same guy killed 6 people.
Is that why he's a robot expert?
It's always on his mind. The guy that got away.
Retinal identification is now being carried out.
You know anything about robotics and computers?
Jack, look at this. You've heard of a bullet that has your name on it? You see that red stripe? It's not a regular commercial chip. This isn't a runaway. This is murder.
He's killed 5 so far. I want him.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
I'm going in.
You're going in. We can send a disarm robot.
It'll hit the disarm, and any minute it's going to decide to hit the kid.
Hey, you got that floater yet?
Programming it now, sir. Didn't you ever want to work the regular force?
This is the regular force. I sort of fell into it by accident.
I kind of liked it, so I took some night courses in robotics, APL, that sort of thing. And then all of a sudden, I just seemed to know more about it than anybody else.
Beautiful. Just beautiful.
I'm glad you're satisfied, Dr. Ripley.
Satisfied? I'm delighted. I'm ecstatic.
It's good. Good.
Where are the chips?
Damn evil son of a bitch!
These aren't all the chips. And where are the templates to make more?
Runaway, Tom Selleck, Cynthia Rhodes, Gene Simmons. Runaway.
You can't run away, Ramsey. I'll find you.
Yeah, so you know what's cool about this? I don't know if you caught that, but Tom Selleck is in it, and Gene Simmons of Kiss fame is in it. So, and there's a bunch of character actors that you're going to recognize. So I can't wait to review this movie at all. Like, I'm excited about this. The other thing this movie does is it really predicts, at least I think it's going to predict a bunch of technology. So I saw a drone. There's a drone in the trailer. There's lasers. There's robots. Like, there's just tons of stuff here that I think it's going to hit on a bunch of things that we're all kind of interested in. So that movie is called Runaway. It came out in 1984. And I will, again, put a link in the show notes so you can watch it. I think it's available a bunch of places. I don't think it's available for free. I might be wrong there. Let me double check while I'm sitting here. It might be available for free. Actually, I think it is. I think it's on Tubi, if you are familiar with that application. I'm really looking forward to this just interaction between Tom Selleck and Gene Simmons. Gene Simmons plays the villain, by the way. At least I think that's what he does based on the trailer. So anyway, that's going to be the movie for next week. I hope everyone, that's the show. I hope everyone has a great and wonderful weekend. It's been my pleasure once again to do a podcast for you. I'll be back next week where we'll do the review of Runaway and talk about, all the things that I've been doing and working on and reading and watching and video games I've been playing over the last week, and hopefully bring a bit of levity and informative, information to you for your weekend. So thanks again, everyone. I hope you have a great and wonderful weekend, and I'll see you next time. Thanks a bunch. Bye-bye.